Good morning! Another day, another video. So let's get into it. So in this video I thought I was going to talk a little bit about teaching. And specifically this doesn't necessarily have to do with programming. It can probably be applied to anything. And basically the reason why I wanted to talk about this a little bit, because I have an ambition that someday I will be a tutor of some sort, or being able to help people learn, in my specific case, programming, because it's the thing that I'm passionate about. So I thought I'd share some thoughts that I've found to be true as I've went through, my life when it comes to especially teaching things. Now, to give you a bit of a background story, I studied teaching. I studied to become a teacher when I was in high school. And I've taught martial arts for a few years, so I have a bit of experience in the field. And I absolutely love it. I have done a few tech talks here in Gothenburg, and done some pro bono work where I've tutored in languages, tutored in programming and so forth. And I also make, when I have a little bit of time, I have a few videos on basic programming concepts on my channel, I think. And so I absolutely love it. And so far I've found that there are a few things that holds true. And basically I found that when it comes to teaching people, especially in this case programming, I found that I have to approach it from the perspective, and this is true for languages as well. I found, which is I think is absolutely amazing. Let's start with the languages. When I was teaching languages to my students, I found very often that most of my students would have had some prior knowledge of the language. They had a fairly good understanding of it, but they were afraid. What do I mean by that? Well, the issue was that when they came to me, most of them had been here in Sweden. Like, for the most part, I helped them with Swedish and English. And it actually turned out that once, they had started talking to me a little bit and we had started just getting to know each other a little bit, I could actually I kind of figure out that their skill level within the language was actually higher than you would have expected, or rather that they thought they had themselves. And and virtually it boiled down to that the issue was not so much that they didn't progress in the way that they thought that they were supposed to be able to do. They actually had enough of a skill set to be able to communicate. So the core issue was that they were afraid of just talking, and they felt embarrassed, because that's the case, right? When you start learning a language, you have this, most people do, at least that's what I found. Most people have this desire to be, you need to feel that you're good at it. And what I used to tell my students in order to kind of mitigate this is that I would tell them that when you and I are speaking in my native language, you have to remember that the goal is not for you to be able to speak as well as I can. You will never be able to do that. I'm a native speaker. But the goal is to be able for you and me to trade information without any meaning being lost. And I will not correct you unless you tell me something, or you say something in Swedish that is wrong enough so that I can't actually understand what you're saying. I will ask for clarification if that happens. And then all the exercises were based on not on learning the verbs or the nouns or like grammar. All that other stuff was irrelevant, or I told them that it was irrelevant, at least to me. Because what I focused on was to get them to be brave enough to put themselves out there, to be brave enough to be a kid, basically, because that's what I told them. Like, if you think about it, yes, you are an adult person, but you're learning a language you've never spoken in your entire life. That puts you on the same level as a small child. And what do children do? Children just play around with the language. It doesn't matter if they're wrong. Nobody's going to blame them if it's wrong. And if you feel embarrassed about how horribly you speak to, like, most of my students came from different parts of the world. And I said, if you ever feel that you're embarrassed about talking to me, or somebody here from Sweden makes you feel embarrassed for not being able to do this stuff, just start talking to them in your native language and let's see how well they do, because odds are that they're not going to be able to talk to you at all. So at least from my perspective, if you're learning Swedish, I feel very flattered. That's what I used to tell them. This is like the most pointless language in the world to learn. It's a small Sweden is a small country, and the only place the Swedish is ever used is in this small country. And here you are learning my language in order to be able to talk to me. How flat! I'm so flattered. I kept telling them that. I kept saying that over and over because I genuinely feel that way. And what I learned from that was that when it comes to teaching, it's not so much, at least from my perspective, about necessarily teaching a curriculum or so forth. It's about figuring out what are the, how do I put it, the fundamental building blocks or pillars that you need to put up around a student in order for them to start asking meaningful questions about the topic that you're teaching. And let's tie this into programming. One of my absolute favorite tutors in the world is Brian Wong, who has a YouTube channel. You should, if you're interested in learning iOS development, and he's doing Android today as well, have a look at that, because he has, in my opinion, he has the two main things that a good teacher needs to have in order to succeed at teaching a subject of any sort. The first and foremost thing is that he loves what he does. I can tell that he's passionate about his work. That is core. You need to care about the stuff that you're teaching, and you need to care about making sure that your students are actually picking up what you are teaching. That's number one. And number two is that you need to be perceptive enough to understand, not just to teach the subject, but you need to understand the student's way of adopting information. What is it that's going to give them the greatest sensation of progress and a sensation of empowerment, rather than what's going to be the most, in your opinion, like critical thing to teach them. How do I put? It's a very abstract concept, but think of it as dieting. That's a great example. One of the best dieting strategies that I've ever seen is to have these Nutrilets, like these diet powders that put you on a very strict diet to start off with for maybe 1 or 2 months, so that you lose a lot of weight in order to get the motivation, or like see that really strong sensation of progress, so that you afterwards can transition into something more healthy and long term. And that's exactly what you're going for. That's exactly what you should be aiming for. Having that, giving your student that sensation that you are helping them set up their life or their personality, or these pillars of long-term learning, in order for you to be able to progress by yourself, going forward. Brian does that in and that's also important. Like every single field you're going to teach is going to be different, right? And when it comes to programming, I am of the same mind that Brian is, where you have, he makes specific videos about certain small type of topics, like kind of spot learning, where you can go in and talk about one single small subject, which I think is great. You should have a lot of those things so you can provide refreshers for different topics. But the most fundamental thing, especially when it comes to programming, is to make the student feel as if they could build an entire application. He has a few of those as well, where you basically walk the student through building, like you yourself as the professional programmer, you teach all of it. You basically just build the thing and let people watch you build it. And when you do that, people start to get down to the absolute most core fundamental fear that people have, in my opinion, when it comes to programming. And that is that veil of magic that almost everybody has. There is a reason why most people who are not programmers and at least they talk to me and they behave as if what we programmers do is magic, because to them it is magic. If you don't it's such a for those of you who are programmers, you may not think about this very often, but what you do is very, very, I'm not saying mysterious, because now it sounds like I'm talking like we're in a fantasy novel or something, but it's something that is very unapproachable to most people. It's very difficult for, I get this question all the time, like, Fredrik, can you explain to me how computer games work? I don't understand how these pixels can come together and create an image, and like, how does it work? Because they don't understand. And what you do when you do something like Brian does, where you actually start from absolutely nothing, there's nothing at all, and you start putting code together in order to create more and more complicated application. You walk them through the whole thing, learning by doing, if you will, is that you remove that ununderstanding, that non-understanding. You don't just give them a small piece here and there, a little bit of snippet of code there, and then you put it, because if you don't put it all together into one, into one big application, it becomes very difficult for the student, as I've found it, to be able to make a meaningful, like, I will argue that the beginner junior programmer doesn't have, like, after you just learn the basics of programming, you can go and learn JavaScript today, and I'm pretty sure that even after you've learned the syntax, you completed all the courses, you will not have the skills or like the confidence in your own abilities that is required in order to build a web page or build a web application, because it is vital that you hold the student's hand from start to finish a few times, so that they can see a repeating pattern in the way that application development works. That's the way I want to teach. It's the way that I try to structure my videos when it comes, my tutorials, and it's also the way that I teach people and I tutor people in real life. So that's a big tip from me, and also appreciation for the work that Brian is doing. So hopefully you found this useful. Have a great day.